Good morning and welcome to another episode of Coffee and Tea with AARP, a bi-weekly conversation with Connecticut leaders about policies and programs that are of interest to older adults. My name is Anna Doroghazi and I'm one of the policy directors at AARP Connecticut. I am really excited for this week's conversation with Maureen McIntyre, who is the Chief Executive Officer of the North Central Area Agency on Aging in Hartford, Connecticut. Hey, Maureen.
Hey, good morning, Anna. How are you?
I am doing well. I am always really excited to have the opportunity to talk with you and to learn about the great work that you are doing in Hartford and the surrounding communities. So let's just jump right in. I mentioned you're with the North Central Area Agency on Aging. What is an area agency on aging? What's a little bit of the history? What is your mission? What is it that you do?
Thanks so much, Anna. And again, it's really nice to be here with you this morning. And thank you just simply for asking who and what we are, because I think a lot of folks in Connecticut may be unaware of who the area agencies on aging are and exactly what we do. So as you mentioned, I am with the North Central Area Agency on Aging, but there's actually 5 of us throughout the state of Connecticut. We've got Marie Allen out of the Bridgeport office. We've got Melissa Lang and her team in New Haven. We've got Mike Hebert and his folks in Waterbury, and Joan Wessel and her team out in Norwich. So here in Connecticut, we've got 5 area agencies on aging to cover the whole state, but actually across the country, there's over 600 of us, and we cover every county and tribal territory in the United States with a variety of different programs and services. And one of the things that we're most known for are the programs that we administer through the Older Americans Act. The Older Americans Act really is sort of our origin story. Back in like 1965, they were beginning to see that people were living longer. Older adults were living longer, but they weren't necessarily living better. They were outliving resources. There really wasn't a safety net. And so the Older Americans Act became a way for Congress to say, we recognize that this is an issue. And so we're going to put something in place. We're going to help to develop an elder network to support people as they got older. And the area agencies on aging kind of came into being around in the 70s when they realized, if we're going to be doing all of this federal funding, it probably makes the most sense to have them implemented, to have these programs and funding streams implemented locally, because they figured out that what I might need in the greater Hartford area may be very different from what they might need in Bridgeport, and certainly different than what they might need in Tallahassee. So the area agencies on aging became that local community face to fund priority projects for older adults. And that's really how we came into being. And so a lot of the things that you might see on a regular basis might actually have Older Americans Act funding at the root of it. One of the most visible might be, for example, home delivered meals. The majority of home delivered meals on the roads right now are probably funded by an area agency on aging with Older Americans Act funding.
And that's something that I really love about the area agencies on aging and the way that you operate across the country, is that there is this national structure to the work that you do, but there's also room to meet the local needs and to take into consideration as you mentioned, some of the needs of somebody in New England might be very different than someone in Arizona, or very different than Alaska or Tallahassee, or all of the places in between. So here in Connecticut, what does that work look like day to day? What are some of the programs and services? I know you had mentioned home delivered meals, which is a very visible, incredibly important program that we see. But what are some of the other things that you're doing out in the community?
Sure. And, the funding is arguably the biggest piece, but it's not the only piece. We also have programs that we administer directly from the agency. So for example, we have a couple of caregiver programs where we fund a variety of respite services for caregivers trying to keep their loved ones at home. And we also have the flagship information and referral and assistance program for the state of Connecticut in the Choices program, which is very apropos right now because we are heading into Medicare open enrollment time, which, as I know you know, is October 15th through December 7th. So our Choices team is really gearing up for their busy season. And I would say that that's one of the more visible programs across the state because, you know, for a program that serves primarily older adults and people with disabilities, Medicare is not as intuitive as one might expect it to be. And so our Choices team across the state, and when I say Choices team, I don't just mean the staff in our offices. We also have cadres of well over 100 trained Choices counselors that are deployed throughout all of our regions that help with this type of Medicare counseling, connecting people to options, helping consumers with that annual decision-making process. Is my current plan meeting my needs or can I do better? And it's a lot. It's a lot of conversation. The stakes can be kind of high. You know, if you don't enroll in the plan that's picture perfect, you know, you're going to be waiting a while until you have the opportunity again. So the Choices teams are really gearing up right now to be able to take on, you know, as many callers as we can. On an annual basis, we talk to about 22,000 people, and about 14,000 of those are specifically calling about their benefits, about a Medigap plan, about their Medicare Advantage plan. How do I enroll if I'm new to Medicare? So very, very dynamic right now with that program. And of course, the caregiver programs know very little seasonality. That's a need around the clock and around the year. So we're happy to be available with those kinds of programs that make a real difference in people's lives.
Yeah, and you know, I wish I could remember off the top of my head the statistic I heard that some huge number of folks never change their plans from year to year. They sort of lock into a plan. I heard somebody describe it as like the toothpaste that you use now as an adult is probably the toothpaste that you used as a kid, but it can be a lot more consequential when you're looking at you know, the drug formularies and all of the details of these plans. So, you know, as Maureen mentioned, October 15th to December 7th, 2022 is open enrollment for Medicare. Maureen, what's the number for Choices if folks want to reach out to give you a call to learn more?
It's 1-800-994-9422. And that phone number will triage the phone call directly to the area agency on aging that's closest to the caller. So there's only one number statewide, which is nice. And granted, you know, you might have a family member that lives in West Hartford, but their loved one lives in Bridgeport. Just be aware that wherever you're calling from, that's the area agency on aging that you'll be connected to.
Okay, great. So those 5 area agencies on aging, you call that Choices hotline and you connect with sort of your catchment area and your local folks.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's excellent. And you know, I know one of the areas where we overlap is on caregiving. There's such a need and such a growing need for those caregivers who are in Connecticut. You know, in nationwide, we see so much work there, and the respite programs, you know, that are offered through the area agencies on aging, and those resources are so incredibly important. So where could family caregivers go to learn more about caregiving resources?
I would suggest that same phone number, 1-800-994-9422. It's always a great idea when people get into the receptionist to identify what their primary reason for calling is, because that way we can identify, oh, you're definitely a Choices caller, or as a family member, you're probably looking more for the service aspect, and we can direct calls more appropriately. But by all means, you know, we have seen an incredible uptick in the number of people needing respite services. And a lot of that has to do with just the complexity these days of of accessing care. I think one of the challenges for the state is going to be really taking stock of the long-term care landscape in terms of workforce, what the impact is, what that looks like, both for families who are interested and willing in taking on more, but also that human service infrastructure that would be comprised of agencies and registries and organizations that staff in-home services. I think we really need to look at developing and investing in the stability of that infrastructure, because as we know, the median age of Connecticut is growing, and our older adults are the fastest growing age cohort. So if we learned anything from COVID, it's that we need to have the people in the positions to provide the care if we're going to be successful, down the line. So I would put that right up there with one of our greatest challenges as a state, and something that we should be looking at, fairly closely.
Yeah, and workforce is one at AARP that we hear about all the time as well, that folks have a lot of questions around, how can I access home care? Are there enough workers? We know that people are really feeling that in institutional care settings, that the staffing levels just aren't where folks, would want it to be, and where it needs to be to provide these services at the level that people deserve. What are some of the other challenges that you're seeing? I mean, I like that you mentioned sort of with the history of area agencies on aging, that it rose out of this need that people identified with. And I loved how you said it, that people were living longer, but outliving resources. So in addition to some of the workforce challenges that you mentioned, what are some of the other issues that folks are facing in the community? Where are we seeing maybe some newer gaps in what's available?
It's interesting because so many of the challenges that were in place back in the 60s and 70s are still in place now, when it comes to the fact that the economic challenges faced by older adults may look different now, but the root of them is still quite the same. Those kitchen table issues that I've heard AARP talk about, what are those things that are creating a cost of living that is challenging for our older adults, perhaps on fixed incomes, perhaps raising grandchildren. We're seeing a lot more homelessness and struggling with housing costs. We're seeing a lot more difficulty with just affordability of automobiles and heating one's home. And, one bright spot, though, that I would love to just quickly mention is how wonderful it will be in 2023 when we can really talk a lot more about where we've come and where we've been on prescription medications, and what a wonderful opportunity that is going to be, with the cap on insulin, with the cap on some of our out-of-pocket costs. So that is a huge benefit for our aging population, because for years, healthcare and out-of-pocket prescription costs were the number one expense that we were tracking and monitoring and advocating for. So in 2023, we'll have a really legitimate and exciting opportunity to impact those. So that is wonderful. But in the meantime, the day-to-day is really going to be challenging. And, what's interesting to us, and I'm sure you see this on a national level as well, but as challenging as things are in Connecticut, when we talk to our peers across the country, Connecticut is one of the leaders in things and programs and supports that we have for our older adults. So we may sometimes, have some consternation about the status of things, but our brethren nationally look at Connecticut and go, oh my goodness, you guys are so lucky to have X, Y, and Z. So, it's sort of one of those, you take the good, you take the bad, and you walk a mile in someone else's shoes. because, I could use all of those. The grass is always greener, all of those things. But by and large, Connecticut does a really nice job, and we have to continue to do that. We need to not get lackadaisical, or we could find ourselves on the other end of things. So.
Yeah. And we're at this moment, right, where we can put off some of these decisions and put off some of this thinking and be very reactive when we see the changes that we know are coming population-wise, with the number of older adults and the folks who are living much longer than ever before in our history. Or we can embrace this and see this as an opportunity to do things better, to do things differently, and to really think about, at AARP, we like to talk about livable communities. So how do we make our communities great places for people of all ages? And if you have policies that are working really well for 80-year-olds, if you have, accessible public spaces and affordable housing and accessible healthcare, that's great for 8-year-olds too. So you really do, end up covering the lifespan when you design for age. So what do you have a couple examples off the top of your head? You've mentioned, Connecticut, and I would agree with this. In a lot of ways, we really are a national leader in terms of some of the programs and services that are available to folks. Are there a few programs, that you can think of that we're doing really well? A few areas where Connecticut has been innovative or responsive?
Sure. I think, for one, I think our focus on Alzheimer's and dementia through the Connecticut Statewide Respite Program is a good example of that. And one of the primary reasons why it's so innovative is because it's one of the few state-funded programs that does not have an age requirement to it. A lot of what we see is very much stratified. You're older when you hit 60 or when you hit 65 but the Alzheimer's respite program does not have an age requirement on it, which is very prescient because as you know, and as a lot of your viewers will remember, Alzheimer's does have an early diagnosis, a young onset track. So, that by virtue of having no age requirement, it allows us to serve a lot of people that would really, go without care otherwise. So that was wonderful. And then, this is not necessarily a Connecticut specific thing, but it speaks directly to some of those kitchen table issues that I mentioned before. So I kind of like to throw it out here. Connecticut and fellow nutmeggers are typically very resistant to change and to asking for help. There's always that feeling that maybe there's somebody else out there that needs it more than me. It's a very, dominant character trait here in New England. But there is a program called Benefits Checkup, which is a way to confidentially, through a computer program, identify every program that you might be eligible for, from extra help with groceries, a little extra help with home heating oil, a little extra help with perhaps paying some of the co-pays and cost shares for Medicare. It's a way to learn what you're eligible for in a non-threatening way. There's no stigma attached. You're not asking for help. You're just merely researching what might be available. And I would definitely encourage, because again, the price of everything is going up. So why not identify every opportunity to save a little here and there, even if it's just to get through this time period that we're currently living in, where things are expensive. Don't leave that opportunity on the table when there are things available that could make life easier. So I'm going to throw that out there again. It's called Benefits Checkup. All the area agencies on aging know how to assist with Benefits Checkup. It also exists online. The website is www.benefitscheckup.org. It's a great opportunity. It's quick, it's confidential. And where else can you do that kind of one-stop shopping and know everything you're eligible for and how to apply?
Great. Thank you so much for talking us through this. And I guess before we wrap up, I really like this point that you made that sometimes folks are a little bit hesitant to reach out. They might think, this isn't for me. Maybe one of my neighbors is more in need of these services. So who should reach out to an area agency on aging? And for folks who do, what should they expect? Because I think that can be a barrier too. Folks just don't know, like, I'm going to call this phone number and then what's going to happen? So could you speak a little bit to, who should reach out and what happens when they do?
Sure. So my first answer to that is we would love everybody to reach out to an area agency on aging for any question that you may have, no matter how small. And the reason that I say that, and it sounds kind of flippant, and I don't intend it to, but the majority of calls that we get are when there's some kind of crisis. So we would love to talk to people when it's not the very worst moment that they've ever experienced, when they, are on a ledge or on the verge or not sure what to do and things are crashing down. We would much rather, answer a couple questions. This is what we would do. This is what you might want to think about. Here's some information. I'm thinking of your wonderful conversations, the difficult conversations. We would love to be part of that early planning, that proactive, what might we be needing? How do we get there? The introduction to home care before it's, okay, we need some help right now. We would love to be in there kind of on an early and often basis, as opposed to typically it's the middle of the night or last thing on a Friday and we have someone being discharged from the hospital. Those are the kinds of calls we typically get. And while we are here for those calls, we are incredibly skilled at those calls. We would love to begin to build a relationship with our communities and build a relationship with our consumers when we can be more proactive than reactive. And when people get a hold of us, you're typically going to get a very nice person on the phone who is going to triage your call. I can't say for sure that you're not going to get a voicemail, because most of us serve a wide variety of towns and we don't necessarily have staffing that is going to cover all of those towns. So you may need to leave a message. Not gonna pretend that won't happen sometimes. However, we will always call back. If you leave us an email, that's great too. And our staff will get back to you with the information that you've either requested or to talk about the issue that started your call to begin with.
Great. And what's that number again for folks who want to reach out?
Sure. It's 1-800-994-9422.
Great. And for folks who might just be tuning in, that is also the number for the Choices program. Maybe if you haven't had any prior interactions with the Area Agency on Aging, maybe you're curious, want to learn a little bit more, give that number a call. Also, Medicare open enrollment is coming up beginning October 15th, and Choices can be a tremendous resource for folks who are trying to navigate the very complicated world that is Medicare. So Maureen, thank you so much. It was, as always, an absolute pleasure to talk to you. And thank you so much for the work that you do as Chief Executive Officer of the North Central Area Agency on Aging. It was so great to have you as our guest today. And yeah, I hope folks reach out to you to learn more about the good work that you do.
Beautiful. It's my pleasure, Anna. As always, I love chatting and I love phone calls. So feel free to just, pick up the phone and give a call, and happy to say hi and continue the conversation.
Wonderful. Well, thank you again to Maureen McIntyre from the North Central Area Agency on Aging. If you're interested in learning more about AARP's work, you can also visit our website, aarp.org/CT, or you can reach out to me directly at adoroghazi@aarp.org. Thank you for joining us today on Coffee and Tea with AARP, and we hope you'll tune in again in 2 weeks for another episode. Have a great day.